Good morning, afternoon to everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Supercharge Ansible for Networking with Itential. Following Ansible Fest last week, there's been a lot of interest and excitement around how Itential complements Ansible. First, a quick introduction for myself. I'm Chris Wade, CTO at Itential, and we also have joining us today, Karan Mudalingal, Senior Solutions Architect. He'll be walking you through the Itential demos in real time today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping points. Today, everybody on the call is going to be muted. We would like as many questions as we can get. Please enter them in through the poll, and if we have time at the end, we'll definitely get through a few questions, and any questions we don't get to during the call, we'll follow up with an email. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're just, as a first introduction, Itential, we're focused on intelligent automation for the modern network. So just a little bit of context, we're going to spend most of the day working through some demos focused on how we complement Ansible. But just to get started, there's four key components when we think about Itential as a software platform. The first being low code. So in the first demo, you're going to see Karan walk through, we're going to build an automation from scratch. So what we mean by this is it's very drag and drop, very easy to use with out-of-the-box integrations we're going to highlight today from Ansible. The second being intent-based network APIs. So as we consume these modules and playbooks from Ansible, we expose them northbound into the IT systems. That API is going to be intent-based and easily consumable by your IT systems. And the third main component is we'll talk about multi-domain. As we get into the second demo, we're going to add an orchestrator as well as a second Ansible installation to show how the platform out of the box is multi-domain and how we can route calls to different environments based upon where the devices or modules might exist. And the last component we'll talk about is network intelligence. And what we mean by this is that the platform has been purpose-built for network automation. So there's a lot of pre-built intelligence within the tasks within the workflow. So whether you're doing pre-checks or post-checks, or whether we need to understand how to consume Yang or Tosca, that is pre-built within the platform, and we'll try to highlight today that in the demos. So where does Itential fit within the modern network ecosystem? So when we talk about customers adopting different network automation technologies, we'll start at the bottom there. Most customers are looking at adopting different DevOps tools like we're going to highlight today with Ansible. They might be adopting different controllers or orchestration-based systems. Some people are looking at intent-based systems. And everybody has some access to some cloud and looking at maybe an SD-WAN solution. So as these platforms are adopted, they present new challenges as we move from kind of a legacy network ecosystem to more of a modern network ecosystem. So from an Itential perspective, what we want to do is add value to those systems by tying them together in a low-code environment to provide some automation in addition to those orchestration and DevOps platforms. So in the demos today, you'll see we're going to be executing some modules, looking at some playbooks that are network-facing, and then we'll expose them through an open API northbound from Itential into some different systems. So the typical IT systems that customers would plug Itential into might be an ITSM system like a ServiceNow or Remedy, and maybe a CRM system like a Salesforce, different operations platforms like PagerDuty, or even an order management platform northbound. So for today's webinar, we're really going to focus on Itential for Ansible. So what does that mean? So if we look at the right-hand side there, you're going to see a screenshot of what Karan's going to demo. But first of all, we're going to federate and decorate some playbooks, roles, and modules. And what that means is as you download and install something like an Ansible 2.6, the modules that are network focused will be discovered and showed up in that view. And we allow you to decorate it with some additional metadata so it's more easily consumable and more model centric. After that, we're going to build some network intelligent workflows to tie together some of these module executions. And ultimately, why we would do this is we believe it expands on the use cases for which you can use Ansible. I know a lot of folks on the call looked at the poll, might have been using Ansible for compute and storage. Maybe some people are looking at applying it to the networking domain. And ultimately, we'll provide those modules. We'll talk about it on GitHub later so that you can plug modules into the northbound of Itential so that it can be easily consumable at Tower for any customers that already have a Tower deployment. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into the first demo. So I'm going to turn it over to Karan.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. During the first demo, we're going to show you how Itential's Ansible Manager interacts with an Ansible deployment. Additionally, we're also going to showcase how a user can leverage Itential's network intelligence and use simply drag and drop methodology to create an automation process from scratch. I'm going to switch over to our demo. What you see in front of you is a graphical interface for the Itential Ansible Manager solution, which is a standalone system that sits on top of an Ansible deployment. The Ansible Manager dynamically federates all network modules available via Ansible. Everyone who has previously worked with Ansible can see a list of module families on the left. And once we dive into a specific module family for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to choose the iOS. You can see all the modules associated with that family. Users also have the ability to dive into a specific module to view details such as input parameters, types, description, enumeration, and defaults. In addition to the federation, Ansible Manager also allows users to decorate these modules, which means they can provide additional details such as description enhancements or a change of type, and provide network-specific defaults to any of these parameters that could be leveraged by any northbound system ingesting these modules. Similarly, the Ansible Manager also federates roles. As you can see, there's some sample roles here and playbooks as well. So the same concept of federation and decoration applies to all of these artifacts at the same time. There's a device tab that shows you the current devices that we're working with. These are all virtual devices. Currently, we have iOS devices, Juno's devices, as well as Big IP. So if the customer wants to onboard all of the devices, we actually provide an API which they can leverage to onboard their entire inventory within the Ansible Manager. And it becomes available as part of your automation process within the Itential platform. Lastly, I would like to go over the REST APIs provided by the Ansible Manager system. As you can see, it's great for a dev team to have these APIs handy so they can test their playbooks, modules, as well as roles before trying to stitch those as part of your automation process. For example, if you wanted to onboard a device, you would simply utilize this API and click on the example value and try it out. So this is all live and it comes with the deployment of Ansible Manager. The next thing we're going to do is jump right into the Itential solution. So as you can see, this is our application ecosystem. It has a lot of purpose-built application as well as tool and builder applications that allow our designers to create an automation process from scratch and also enhance existing ones. So as part of this demo, I'm going to show you how to create a workflow that will create an interface on an iOS device. So let's get started with this. I'm going to go ahead and create our new workflow, call it webinar 1, save. So now that we have the panel in front of us, on the left-hand side, you'll see 3 drop-downs. The first is applications. So we expose both our applications as well as adapters. The second drop-down is basically all the applications that have been loaded within this instance of Itential solution. As you see, there are Ansible-specific applications here. All of these have been auto-generated by our intelligence when we federate information from the Ansible Manager about each one of these module families. So the purpose of this demo, we're going to choose the Ansible iOS. And as you see, the third drop-down showcases all the tasks available. So these are network intelligent tasks that you can drag drop within your panel to create your automation process. If you remember, you saw this similar list within the Ansible Manager. All of these are federated dynamically, which means if you were to add a brand new module, a network module within Ansible, we would automatically federate and create these tasks for you so you can drag drop. For the purpose of this demo, we're going to use the iOS facts in the interface in order to do pre-checks as well as create that interface as part of the process. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and add it to the pane here. The second task we're going to work with is the iOS interface. So let's dive into the task. So when you double click on the task, you'll see that it has a summary, description, and the incoming variables. So since we're federating, this information is provided by either the decoration or live from the Ansible module itself. So the users have all the tool sets and information they need in order to provision and utilize this specific task. As you see, there's a reference task option here. It shows you job, which means you can variabilize any of these input parameters or you can statically set a value for each of these input parameters. For the purpose of this demo, we're going to keep this as a job variable and have a user enter it during runtime. For the gather subset piece, we're actually going to ask for interfaces since we are interested in only getting information about the interfaces that we are going to create. And up here, we're going to go ahead and change the summary to pre. And now we're done with that. So for the second task we have here is the interface module task. This allows us to create a brand new interface on the device. So as you see, there are several parameters listed here when we federate from the module. Some of these are optional and some of these are mandatory. In this case, we're going to leave the device and the name to be job variables and have the user enter them. For all the rest of the other parameters, we'll make them static and only set values for the one that we actually need in order to provision that new interface. So you can alternatively keep all of these as job variables and allow the user to pass them in as part of our network API. But in this case, we're going to statically set it. For the enable, we're going to check the flag to true. And for all the other parameters, we don't need any input value when we're creating a brand new interface. So we will leave it out as part of this demo. And once we are done with this, we're going to go ahead and save this task, update. So the next part is we're going to create transition for our automation process. So there's a hotkey where it creates a success transition. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that we have multiple different types of transitions here. So you can have error, failure, and loop, which gives you the ability to take care of fallout scenarios as well as for each looping scenarios within your automation flow. The next thing we're going to add is another post task. So as you see, we can use an existing task. If you want to reuse it, we can utilize the cloning functionality so you don't have to re-enter all the information. So once I clone it, you'll realize that it added that same task again, and I would just transition that over to here. And if I double click on it, nothing changed. It keeps all the data from the previous task. I would just have to change that to post. The next part of our automation process, we're actually going to perform a query to pull out information from this specific task and the post so we can do a diff. So we have out-of-the-box functionality, and all of these are workflow operators that allow you to do multiple different things like data manipulation, query, and evaluations. In this case, we're going to use the query task in order for you to fetch values from a previous task. So if we go right into this particular query, you can see that we can pass in an output of a previous task in here and perform a specific query. In this case, we're going to call this pre-data because that's the data that we're going to fetch from the previous task, and we don't want to pass on null. So this is where you actually provide the query. So since I've worked with this module quite a bit, I know exactly what is the embedded key that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in, and this could also be variabilized. And this is the output that we get from the pre-task. So now that we're done with that, what we're going to do is, since I want to do the same operation for the post, I'm going to go ahead and clone it and add the transition here as well. So the last part of our automation is adding a preview diff. So if I go and add this particular task, screw that over, and then I'm going to pipe in the output of these two queries into this diff task. So as you can see, this diff task it's a manual step, which means you can actually use our role-based access control to only allow group members of a certain group to work this specific task. In this case, I'm going to choose the operations group. So only members from the operations team can actually see and work this task. And this task also has some configurable parameters like header and a message. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this out, diff, and review the diff. For the label, the first label, I'm going to call it pre. So for the value piece, I'm actually getting the value out of the pre data and passing that into this particular task that actually does a diff. For the second part, we're going to call it post. And for the value for the post, I'm going to call, sorry, we'll go ahead and update this for this query, change that to post data. So as you can see, once I change that to post data, it reflects here. So the capability of this automation platform is it realizes what is finished prior to this specific task, and it allows you to use the output of that task into here. So it keeps chaining automatically for you. So we're going to go ahead and select the post data, select the output of that. And since the button names are configurable, we'll just call them proceed and then retry, just in case you want to build in fallout scenario. And then now we're going to go ahead and tie that into the end. So at this point, we have completed building out our automation process. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and kick it off and test it out by running live against a real virtual device and create a new interface on it. Let's call it test 1. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly check and make sure I have an object representation. So this was missed. So I'm going to go ahead and select post data here, and that's the output. So that's what we're going to perform the query on. So I can go ahead and modify this flow without affecting or writing any code. So that's the beautiful thing about it. And now I'm going to go ahead and kick it off one more time and verify that it only asked me for 2 things. So the first thing is a device name. So since we're working with Core ATL 3, I'm going to go ahead and save that here, and then the name of the interface that we're going to create. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and create loopback 15 on the iOS device. So at this stage, either you could provide that manually, but most of the customer, the normal use case is you would have an IT system sitting northbound utilizing the network API in order to start this automation process. So it says the job has been initiated. I'm going to quickly go into the active jobs page. So as you can see, this automation process has been kicked off. We're going to quickly dive into the visualize screen. This actually shows you the process and on which step it's on currently as part of the automation process. So it has completed the pre, it has completed creating the interface, and now it's doing a post check. And now it's completely, it's done with the queries and it's on a Diff Task. One thing I want to highlight here is if you double click on a completed task, we keep information about when it was started, the end time, what the incoming parameters were, even though they were variabilized. We keep track of all of those for audit purposes. Also, you can learn a lot from the outgoing. So in the future, if you wanted to perform evaluations or queries, you can do so from this data available within the workflow itself. So in this case, since we're on the manual task, let's quickly go to the details page. As you see in the details page, this was assigned to the operations group, and since I'm part of that group, I'm able to work this task. I'm going to go ahead and click work, and as you see, it has created loopback 15 on that virtual device, and it was non-existent before. And we're going to go ahead and proceed, and the workflow has gone to 100%. So that was an example of us creating a automation process from scratch using the network intelligence and the drag and drop functionality. So I'm going to hand it back to Chris.
Appreciate it, Karan. And if it wasn't lost while you're going through the demo, a lot of times we get asked to show how easy it is to build from scratch. Usually we start off by executing a kind of a pre-built workflow. But for the purpose of the webinar, since we got so many questions, especially at Ansible Fest, about what is the process to build something from scratch, we wanted to start off with kind of a blank canvas and show what it takes to leverage kind of out of the box Ansible modules and build it from scratch. And a byproduct of one of the parameters not being filled out, if you noticed, when Karan went to run it the first time, there were actually 3 parameters there. And it's because one of those things was set as a job variable. So what happens is when you build a workflow, it actually auto-generates the interface and the parameters that are required by that. So as you're building the workflow, you don't have to think about what parameters need to be set. Just basically you build the process flow and it will auto-generate those parameters on the fly, which we think is quite valuable. So maybe back to a slide and then we'll jump into the second demo. So when we talk about moving on an automation journey, a lot of customers are focused still on building scripts on the CLI. And as we look at people moving towards the modern network and adopting more controller and orchestration infrastructure, we really look at a handful of technologies that are leveraged by a majority of our customers. So we still have obviously a lot of CLI, and we're moving towards standardizing those around modules and playbooks and roles, especially today, focusing on the Ansible solution. And complementing that, in our opinion, is having orchestration, both focused on the network, which typically is focused on more of a Yang type of construct, or cloud orchestration systems, which a lot of times leverage Tosca. So some customers, as they adopt these technologies, might be creating more silos between operational groups. But we think it's critically important that as you look at automation and as you look at applications and services that are going to exist today and in the future, that they're going to traverse a lot of these domains. So as we talked about kind of at the onset with the slides, we talked about focusing in a multi-domain environment. So as we still have the networking technologies facing the network, and we think customers are going to have a multitude of technologies and a multitude of things in the future where you want to have flexibility to make sure you're choosing the right tool for the right job. But ultimately, we want to expose those through an API that's highly standardized towards your IT systems, so that we don't expose the churn and innovation that's happening on the network directly into those systems unless we have to. So if we look at the second architecture real quick before we jump back into the screen, the first demo architecture was very simple. So we just showed a single Ansible manager, and we had an open LDAP system in there. And you saw when Karan did the demo, he clicked and he assigned the manual task to an operations team member. And the blue tasks in the system we generally refer to as manual, and the green is automated. And it is important, as most customers are on that journey. We talk about crawl, walk, run. We talk about starting where you're at today, defining your internal processes, and then working towards a more of a closed loop or more of a fully automated lifecycle. So the purpose of the second demo is we're going to show something that's pre-built with a little bit more complexity than we have time to build during the webinar. And we're also going to show this has no manual steps. So there's going to be, not stealing too much thunder from the demo, but there will be fallout conditions that are manual. But most customers target network automation architecture is to focus on automation throughout the process with some manual fallout to deal with exceptions. So if I just look at the architecture, instead of one Ansible manager, we're going to have two. And so that we can show both DevOps tools and orchestrators working in concert, we also have an NSO orchestrator in this demonstration. And if you see on the right-hand side, we've actually added a resource manager in the form of an IPAM system. So within the port turnup, we're actually going to access that through an API so we can assign an IP address. And ultimately, we want to expose this all through a northbound system. So in this instance, we have two different examples here. So I mentioned the Ansible modules that we have on GitHub that are specific to some of the Itential APIs, and we're going to continue to expand on that. And what that means is you can have out-of-the-box integration with some playbooks and execute those through Tower. So if you have some existing Tower playbooks, or you're using Ansible for compute and storage and you want to add networking, then you can use these modules out of the box to leverage Itential for some of the network automation capabilities directly into your Tower implementation. And we also can expose it through other northbound systems, and a common use case is through an ITSM platform like ServiceNow, which is what we're going to highlight in the second demonstration. So with that, I'll turn it back to Karan so we can run through the demo.
All right, thank you, Chris. So as part of the second demo, we're going to kick off a port turnup request from ServiceNow. It's the same request can be initiated by any other IT systems that can leverage our network APIs provided by Itential. So in this case, I'm going to quickly dive into the port turnup request here. So it's actually requesting two pieces of information here, the device name as well as the interface description. So in this case, we have two devices that we have available to work. So first one is managed by NSO and the other one by Ansible. I'm going to go ahead and select the second one. Let's provide a brief description here. And then there are two additional options as part of this request is you can bypass the verification and the CR approval. So these two steps are actually built into our automation process. So it allows, from the northbound, it actually allows you to bypass them, which means it will automatically perform those actions for you and not have a manual step within. So this kind of allows you to create automation processes that are zero touch. Also, when there's a fallout, it will alert authorities that are responsible for fixing it. So let's go ahead and order it from here. We're gonna take a few more steps before it actually kicks off within the Itential platform. So over here, I'm gonna quickly jump into the request item. change the state. So when I actually change the state here, you'll notice network API gets sent down to Itential platform, and it will interact back with ServiceNow. So you see that there's a job ID associated with this work order now, which means ServiceNow can actually use this ID to keep status and also interact back with that workflow within the Itential platform. Let's jump back to the Itential platform. We're going to go ahead and go to the active jobs. As you see, for the request item 10,054, ServiceNow has created a port turnup request within the platform. These are all the tasks that has happened prior to the actual change within the network. We're going to quickly jump into the visualize screen. So you'll notice that it's performing some pre-checks here. I'm going to quickly dive into the flow a little bit and point out a few things. So there are certain sections of the workflow that we're interacting for change management. So this task actually interacts with ServiceNow to create a new service request, and then it moves on and creates some of the data and manipulates the data that we're going to use in the following tasks later. You'll notice here that it's performing pre-check and we have a fallout. So just in case our premeditated pre-checks fail, this evaluation will either go forward or go up in the fallout procedure. So you'll see that there's a manual step where the user can actually see why it failed, and then they can take an appropriate action later on through a manual step. The next set of tasks over here are interacting with our IPAM system to actually find a subnet, and whatever the first free subnet is, it will get assigned to during the port turnup. So we're actually formulating data and we're going into the sub workflow. So what this sub workflow is, it's an automation process created independently to have a modular fit within the entire process. So this sub workflow can be utilized directly, it can be kicked off directly, or it could be part of a bigger process that you might have in order to automate your network. So right now it's performing post checks, and if all goes well with the post checks, it's going to go ahead and move forward and end the job. Once the job ends, I'm going to quickly browse over what path it took. So right now it's performing post checks, and since we're bypassing the verification as well as the CR process, it's going to go ahead and end the job. Go back to the details page here, and you'll notice that the entire automation process is now complete. I'm going to quickly dive into the visualize again. So as you see, things that are highlighted in gray were not executed, which means the port turnup successfully went through and actually ran through the success path here. I'm going to quickly dive into the sub workflow here just to kind of show you the structure. You see so the data gets passed in from the main flow into the sub workflow, which is modular. It will perform some evaluation whether this device was managed by Ansible or another orchestrator like NSO. In this case, since it was managed by Ansible, it will utilize the modules in order to perform the port turnup operation. So I'm going to quickly dive into the iOS config. Well, let's take a look at the incoming. So we know the device name, and these are the lines of configuration that were automatically generated based on all the information that we federated and went and captured from the IPAM system. And this is the outgoing. So as you can see, the module returns true when it actually makes a change onto the network. And this is the information that was actually sent down to the device in order to actually create this port turnup. So that was the end. That was the end of our demo 2. Just to kind of show you how robust, how we can actually build robust automation interacting with multiple different IT systems and southbound network technologies to achieve your automation goals. I'm going to hand it over to Chris again. Chris.
Excellent, appreciate it. So if we think about what we just saw within that second demonstration, when we're working with customers and we're talking about network automation, a lot of the focus, especially at the network technology layer, is really focused around that middle part, that execution, where we have it labeled as Ansible and orchestrators and controllers. So it's really focused on port turnup, software upgrade, policy change. There's a whole host of things that we automate as a market and as an industry. As people talk about adopting this technology more pervasively and more widely within an organization, we really start talking about how fast we can go, which use cases are most applicable for automation, and to build the trust within the organization, as well as have that kind of crawl, walk, run attitude for a lot of these use cases. We really focus a lot on kind of the end-to-end network automation flow, which was highlighted in that second demonstration. So some of the stuff that was happening on the background that Karan referred to, there's change requests, interaction with the ITSM systems, there's approval processes. With that one, we did an extremely automated one without any fallout. But you could have different approval processes. Sometimes you have to ship a device. There might be manual intervention that needs to be had. And then on the follow-up task, maybe we need to update CMDBs, maybe we need to update IPAM systems, maybe we need to ask performance management platforms to start monitoring this equipment or any sort of assurance related tasks. So when we really think about the end-to-end automation, you know, we very much focus on the execution portion, which is why we're doing this. But to grow automation within everybody's organization, a lot of times it's helpful to think about the end-to-end process. So ultimately, why Itential? So hopefully you saw some of this today, but ultimately it's extremely flexible, and because we're leveraging a host of technologies, highlighting Ansible today, it's independent of whether it's a physical network, whether it's a virtual network, whether you're talking about cloud infrastructure. So it's really about network automation and network intelligence, independent of the type of network that you have today and the type of network you'll have in the future. From a scalability perspective, in the second demonstration, we started talking about multiple instances of Ansible running. We talked about scaling across different orchestration and DevOps platforms. And what this means is that as you add more devices to the infrastructure, the overhead of managing that metadata and routing the type of automation to the right platform can get quite complex. So out of the box, Itential supports those different adapters registering what they support from a device or a service perspective, and it takes the burden of routing those APIs to the right platform. So in Karan's second demonstration, we didn't have to tell it, go to Ansible East or go to Ansible West or go to an NSO that's responsible for a certain data center. It learns which devices, services, and activities are responsible by which network technology, and it dynamically routes those calls to the right place, which as you scale your infrastructure, we think is extremely important. The next label on here is really talking about the types of activities, and we've done a lot of work around understanding what is the full set of activities that we can automate within the network. We typically talk about them in 4 different categories. So whether it's device management and config management, you know, there's a lot of backups, there's a lot of restorations, there's a lot of golden config types of activities. There's a lot of maintenance activities. So that's software upgrades, that's lag bundle changes, you know, things that are done typically during maintenance windows that are not in band. Service activities, so service order management, this is new services being deployed. And the last one we usually talk about is policy. So applying network policy to the network can include things like access control lists, firewalls, load balancers. We think there's an entire category of policy-centric network activities that can be applied to both the cloud and network infrastructure. And ultimately, something we've kind of hinted at throughout the webinar is really moving to kind of a NetOps and agile ecosystem. So, you know, providing a low-code interface to the people that understand what needs to be automated in the network, we think is quite powerful. There's always going to be a need for a core team of developers and module developers to support different network technologies, to understand different integrations with different IT systems. But ultimately, we want to put the power in the hands of the people that are understanding what needs to be automated within the network. And we think that expanding the skill set within all of our organizations so that everybody can participate in some way within network automation is critically important. So with that, we'll move into the Q&A. So I'm going to, we have a few minutes here, so I'll take a few questions. So I had a question on whether the config lines are using Jinja templates, grabbing inputs from groups, host, vars. So when the modules are executed, you can either get, and I'm looking at Karan, he might correct me if I'm wrong, but you can get the raw output back from the module as it comes back, or you can apply some templating to that. So whether it's Jinja or Text FSM, we're looking at a variety of mechanisms because ultimately that raw output from the device coming back is somewhat useful, and we do turn that into a manageable payload, as I think you saw Karan putting some JSON notation and some of those parameters. But you can also templatize it, and we're looking at a variety of mechanisms, so we can use kind of the standard Ansible community templating capabilities so that you can continue to use it as you saw fit. So another one that came in is, which network devices do you support? So when Karan was logging into the Ansible manager, you saw he was scrolling through. We focused on just some iOS modules today, but you saw when he was scrolling through, we basically take today the 2.6 deployment and we filtered out for the networking modules plus some computational modules that people find useful. And we discover those, and that's what's available within the system. So from an Itential standpoint, there's not any logic within the system to understand a specific type of network or a specific type of OS or device. We are basically federating that on the fly. So we think the benefit to our customer base is that as the community grows those modules and as they become more robust and as they're enhanced, as they're loaded into the system and we discover and federate those things, that within the Itential platform, you'll just basically absorb or understand those new capabilities on the fly without any additional configuration. Yeah, I'm getting a few more, so we'll take maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll maybe respond to the rest in email, but I definitely appreciate all the questions. So how does Itential work with custom modules and roles that I've written myself? So when Karan was in so basically you would load those modules in the directory structure of where the Ansible modules are, and within basically the Ansible manager configuration, you can give some additional paths. So you might have like the 2.6 path, and you might have custom modules in a different path. If you follow the same kind of metadata that's available within those modules, then we'll be able to discover them. If you have chosen not to do that, then you can use the decorating function to define what the parameter inputs are for each of those. So the way we're able to do both modules, roles, and playbooks all equivalently is that basically the modules have the metadata out of the box, and sometimes the playbooks, depending upon how you wrote your playbook, you might or might not have done that. So basically you can do it within the module itself, or you can decorate it within the Ansible manager application. But ultimately that's important so that when you drag and drop it on the canvas or you're interacting with it through an Itential API, we basically look at those as a uniform interface because we've decorated them all to the same level. So whether you're executing a module or a playbook at that point, we view them as fairly equivalent from an Itential perspective. Obviously within the Ansible ecosystem and the different logic that you could have written in that playbook, that execution or runtime logic would be left with an Ansible. And I have other systems than ServiceNow. How do we integrate with other things? So we have a large kind of ecosystem of adapters outside of the ones we've highlighted today. But the most important aspect of maybe integrating with those other systems is that we have an adapter template or an adapter library to generate from. So we have some wizards that you can point at an existing system and pass in Swagger or other types of documentation so we can auto-generate those adapters on the fly. And we definitely would be interested in talking about what specific platforms as we continue to try to grow that ecosystem. I think we'll stop there. I definitely appreciate all the questions and continue to add them. We'll follow up with everybody individually. So thank you for your participation and engagement today. Hopefully you found the webinar useful and insightful. For further questions, please contact us at the email listed or visit our website. We look forward to talking to you. Thank you once again and have a great day.